I sat there waiting, like I always did. 5 hours. My little brown suitcase tucked tight between my knees. I didn't move much, just kept my eyes on the sliding doors, watching every face that came through. My phone had already died somewhere between hour 2 and 3, but I still held it in my hand like it might come back to life, just to tell me he was on the way. I didn't eat. Didn't drink. Just sat there, rocking gently on a cold silver bench, trying to warm myself with memories that used to mean something. A mother waits differently, you know? Not with impatience, but with hope. The kind that knots in your throat and tastes like metal. Every time the doors opened, my back straightened, my fingers squeezed the handle of my bag, and every time it wasn't him, I told myself maybe next time. Maybe he hit traffic, maybe he had to stop for gas, maybe he cared enough to still be coming. But hours passed. Minutes stretched until they hurt. The crowd thinned, the hugs around me faded, and still I sat. A woman asked if I needed help. I smiled and told her I was fine, but I wasn't. Not really. I was sitting in a building meant for reunions, carrying the quiet truth that mine wasn't coming. He said he had work emergencies. But what kind of emergency forgets its mother? Now, before I carry on, I just want to say thank you for being here, for listening, for giving me a few minutes of your day. I don't take that lightly. Let me know where you're watching from. I always wonder whose porch light I'm sitting across from tonight. And if you've ever felt forgotten by someone who should have remembered you, someone you gave your best to, tell me your story in the comments below. Don't hold it in. This is a space for the ones who kept showing up, even when nobody came for them. When I finally stood up from that cold bench, my legs ached like they were carrying more than just weight. They were carrying years. I pulled my suitcase behind me, slow and steady, the wheels thudding softly across the concrete, as if they too were tired. The rain had started, just a light drizzle, enough to make the air smell like metal and wet pavement. I didn't rush. There was no reason to. The cab stand sat under a flickering light, and the driver didn't even ask where I was going, just popped the trunk and nodded like he'd seen this kind of waiting before. I got in the back seat, still holding on to my dead phone like it could somehow fix what had already happened. The cab was warm but quiet, and that silence filled with memories I hadn't asked for. He reached behind the seat and offered me a little pack of tissues. I shook my head. "I'm fine," I said. But I wasn't. I wasn't crying. Not yet. But my spirit had started to leak in places I couldn't patch with words. I watched raindrops race each other down the window, and with every mile, my mind went backward. School lunches packed with love, night shifts worked without sleep, bills paid with prayers. Every mile was a memory he seemed to forget. And still, I sat there trying to believe he had a reason. That maybe he meant well. But meaning well doesn't leave your mother on a bench for 5 hours. The house came into view, porch light still on like I left it, and I felt my chest tighten. I handed the driver a few bills, nodded a thank you, and stepped out into the wet night. I paid for the ride. Just didn't know I'd already paid for something else too. The cab pulled off and left me standing there with my suitcase in one hand and my keys in the other, staring at a house that didn't feel like mine anymore. The porch light was on, just like I always kept it, but the energy spilling out from behind that front door wasn't warmth. It was noise. Loud, careless music thumping like a heartbeat that didn't belong to this home. I took a step forward, then another, and as I got closer, I could see shadows moving through the curtains, flickers of color from flashing lights bouncing off the walls. My front yard had cars I didn't recognize, shoes tossed near the steps, and laughter I couldn't place. For a second, I thought maybe I was at the wrong house. Maybe the driver had taken a wrong turn. But my wind chimes were still hanging by the window, and my rose bush, the one I'd planted with my bare hands after my husband passed, was still blooming by the gate. This was my house, my home. I unlocked the door slowly, heart pounding, breath shallow. The moment it opened, heat and bass hit me all at once. The hallway smelled like liquor and too much perfume. Shoes lined the walls, jackets thrown over furniture. I stepped inside and my feet sank into a sticky floor that used to be clean. My picture frames were crooked. My good lamp had a red scarf draped over it. I walked past the dining room and into the living room, and that's when I saw them. Strangers, young, loud, dancing like they paid rent. A woman I'd never seen was sitting in my favorite chair, the one with the knitted blanket I made the winter I broke my leg. Another man was pouring drinks from my cabinet into my crystal glasses, the ones I only brought out on Christmas and funerals. And there, right in the center of it all, was my son. Laughing, handing someone a drink and saying, "All on me, my treat." My heart didn't break in that moment, it folded in on itself. I didn't say a word. I just watched him from behind the hallway wall, the way you watch someone you used to know, but can't recognize anymore. He was wearing new sneakers, talking like a man who never owed anybody anything, holding a cup full of my savings and acting like it was pocket change. I raised him to be kind. I raised him to help. I raised him to share, not to steal. I stood there in the shadows for a long moment, watching him move through the room like a king in someone else's castle. Head held high, mouth full of stories, bragging to people who didn't know the first thing about where that roof came from or what it cost to keep it standing all those years. My hand slipped into my purse and found the second phone I carry, the one with just a few apps on it and a cracked screen. I tapped it to life with a shaky finger, barely breathing. The noise around me fading into the background like a bad dream you can't wake up from. The banking app loaded slower than usual, like it knew something was coming and didn't want to show me. I logged in, heart pounding, palms damp, and then there it was. My savings. My emergency cushion. The money I built from years of saying no to myself. Years of side jobs and skipped vacations and sewing the same coat button back on every winter. The account was nearly empty. Transaction after transaction, liquor store, catering, speaker rental, ride shares, all within the last 48 hours, all traced back to the card I left behind in the kitchen drawer for safekeeping, the one he must have known how to access. My name was still on it, but the respect had been removed. I didn't scream. I didn't faint. I didn't even gasp. I just went cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver, but the kind that settles in your bones when you realize you've been holding on to love with both hands, and the other person's been using theirs to take. I stepped backward, careful not to make a sound, slipped into the hallway while their laughter echoed behind me, like a drum I didn't belong to. My feet carried me down the corridor, past the bathroom where I used to scrub his knees when he'd fall off his bike, past the old closet that still had my late husband's coat hanging inside it. I reached my bedroom door, turned the knob slowly, stepped in, and shut the world out. The music didn't stop. The people didn't notice. Not one voice called after me to ask if I was okay, if I needed a seat, if I'd even made it home. I locked the door. Click. Just one soft sound, but it felt like 1,000 bricks on my chest. I sat on the edge of the bed without taking off my shoes, just listening to the muffled bass, thinking how strange it was to feel like a stranger in the very place you built with your own 2 hands. This room had seen me through heartbreak, through healing, through long nights praying with an open Bible and a cracked voice. And now, it was my hiding place. I leaned back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. Not crying, not moving, just feeling the quiet hum of something breaking that couldn't be glued back together with apologies or explanations. My hands curled around the edge of the blanket I'd quilted years ago, and I whispered to myself so low that not even God had to lean in to hear it. I gave him everything, and he spent it like it was nothing. I stayed in that bed for what felt like hours, though the clock hadn't even turned twice. Just lying there with the weight of betrayal pulling at every corner of my body. I could hear the beat of the music pulsing through the walls like a bad memory that refused to fade, laughter rolling across my ceiling like thunder, careless and loud and hollow. Every glass clink, every cheer, every step above the hardwood floor I paid for with overtime and sore feet, it all echoed like a slap. But I didn't move, not yet. I stared at the ceiling fan slowly turning above me, and I let the silence inside my room speak louder than the noise outside it. And then, just like that, something in me shifted. Not out of rage, not out of revenge, but out of clarity. Because when someone shows you how little they think of your worth, you don't scream for them to see it. You protect it. I sat up slowly, legs stiff from the ride and the waiting, and reached for the small box I keep beneath my nightstand, the one with all the important things I never thought I'd have to touch again. I pulled out my documents, the ones I'd signed back when I still believed security came from trust. I opened my laptop, turned it toward me, and signed into my bank with the same fingers that once tied his shoes, once buttoned his tiny coats in the winter. The screen lit up, and I saw it again. The almost empty balance, the careless charges, the mockery of my labor. I clicked into settings, clicked again into security, and found the option that let me stop every transaction from moving forward. Confirm freeze. That's what the button said, so I clicked it. No hesitation, no second thoughts, just the soft final click of a woman reclaiming her name. And as the screen turned green and the account froze, I didn't blink. I just sat there. Then I picked up my phone, not the broken one, the main one, and scrolled through my contacts until I found the lawyer I hadn't spoken to since the house was paid off. It rang twice. She answered with her usual warmth, but I didn't match it. I asked her calmly if she could review my power of attorney documents, if the house title was still in my name only, if anything had shifted while I wasn't looking. She told me she'd check and call me back by morning. I thanked her and hung up. My voice didn't shake, not once. Because I'd already done all the crying in years past when I thought loyalty could be passed down like a recipe. Now I was done explaining my worth to people who only saw me as a balance to drain, a house to use, a body to forget until they needed more. I placed my phone on the table, turned off the lamp, and lay back into the silence that had never betrayed me. Outside that door, they kept laughing, kept dancing, kept pouring. But inside these four walls, I was taking back everything they thought they'd get away with. They danced on my dime. Now they'd pay with my silence. Morning didn't come with birdsong that day. It came with stillness, the kind that fills a house after it's been used up and tossed aside. I opened my eyes to the sound of nothing, not a laugh, not a bass beat, not even a whisper. Just a quiet that's pressed heavy against the walls like it was trying to apologize for what they held the night before. I sat up slowly, my back sore, my legs stiff, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. I pulled on my slippers, the ones with the worn soles from pacing that same hallway over and over, and stepped into the morning like I was walking into a new version of myself. The door creaked open, and I was met with the wreckage. Red plastic cups toppled in corners. Liquor bottles rolling on their sides, one still dripping into a flower vase that had no business being on the floor. My favorite framed photo of my wedding day was tilted on the wall, smudged with fingerprints that didn't belong to anyone I knew. My rug, the one I hand-braided one winter, was bunched under a folding table that had never lived in my home. Someone's boots were near the fireplace. Someone else's coat lay draped across the piano bench. Doors were open, windows cracked, a half-eaten sandwich on the kitchen counter I just cleaned before I left. The house smelled like old beer and perfume I didn't wear. I stood in the center of it all, not speaking, not touching anything. Just letting the scene settle into my memory so I'd never forget what disrespect looked like when it wore a smile and played music too loud to hear your heartbeat break. I made my way to the kettle, boiled some water, poured it into the same teacup I'd used the day I paid off this house in full. I sat at the kitchen table with that cup between my palms like it was the only warmth left in the room. And then I heard the footsteps. Slow. Hesitant. Heavy like they were carrying the weight of a truth just discovered. A knock on my bedroom door, soft at first. "Ma?" I didn't answer. Another knock. "Ma, my card's not working." I stood up, walked calmly to the door, and turned the knob. He looked at me like a man realizing he'd set fire to his own home and didn't know how to ask for water. I didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't ask him why. I just looked him in the eyes and said, "I know." He stood there a minute longer, waiting for me to explode, to fold, to cry, but none of that came. I turned around and walked back to the kitchen. He followed slowly. We sat. No words between us at first, just the hum of a refrigerator and the weight of a silence that didn't need explaining. He looked smaller than he did the night before, less proud, less certain. I stirred honey into my tea and then I spoke. Not rushed, not cold, just true. I sat at that airport for 5 hours. 5. While you played music with people I've never met in a house I built. He looked down, but I didn't stop. You left me there like I didn't matter. No call, no check-in, not even a lie good enough to feel like care. And when I got home, when I walked through that door, I saw you pouring drinks into my good glasses, using my money, laughing like the world owed you something, like I hadn't already given it to you. His mouth opened, but I held up my hand. Don't. Not yet. He closed it. His eyes were glassy now. That money, that wasn't just a number in an account. That was every tired morning, every missed meal, every coat I didn't buy. That was my backup plan, my cushion, my breath between the bills. You didn't just spend money, you spent my safety. I leaned back in my chair, not angry anymore, just tired. I gave you everything. And you gave that to strangers. He wiped at his eye, looked like he wanted to say something that could fix it all. But there aren't words for that kind of betrayal. Only silence, only space, only truth. You left me, then stole from me, but you didn't break me. He nodded, slow, quiet, and I sat there with my tea, letting him feel the weight of what he did without carrying it for him. Not this time. He sat there with his head bowed and nothing left to say, and I sat across from him with too much inside me to say it all. But some things don't need to be repeated. Some things just need to be remembered. And so I let the quiet stretch as far as it needed to go, while my mind went backwards. Not out of bitterness, but because remembering is the only way I survive betrayal like this. I remembered birthdays I never missed, even the ones that fell on work days. Even the ones I could barely afford to decorate for. I remembered staying up till midnight to bake boxed cakes and blowing up dollar store balloons until my cheeks hurt, just so he'd wake up to joy. I remembered wrapping toys in newspaper when wrapping paper wasn't in the budget, drawing little stars on them so he'd still feel like he mattered. I remembered the flu nights, sitting on the edge of his bed with a damp cloth in one hand and prayers in the other, whispering that he'd feel better soon while my own body burned with exhaustion. I remembered holding him through coughs and chills and long nights of medicine alarms and lost sleep, and I never once let him feel like he was a burden. I remembered his high school graduation, the way he walked across that stage in shoes I bought from a secondhand store and a suit I'd hemmed myself. I clapped so loud, the woman next to me jumped, but I didn't care. I wanted the whole world to know that was my son, my boy. My pride walking into a future I thought I was building right beside him. I remembered the times he came home crying from school because he didn't fit in, and I told him that kindness lasts longer than popularity. I remembered him at 17 when he asked if I'd co-sign for a used car, and I did. Even though it meant I had to cut groceries for 2 months just to make up the difference when the first payment came late. I remembered washing dishes late at night with cracked hands, feet aching from standing all day, and still humming to myself because at least the lights were on and his belly was full. I remembered selling my wedding ring, the one thing I kept after his father passed, because we were behind on rent and I'd rather lose gold than let him feel the cold of a shelter. I remembered walking home from work in the rain, shoes soaked, because I couldn't afford the bus fare that week, but didn't want to take from the envelope marked college. I remembered choosing secondhand everything, patching up clothes with thread and hope, just so he wouldn't walk through life feeling like he came from nothing. I remembered lying awake night after night doing math in my head, trying to make $26 stretch into 4 days of meals, praying that if God could feed the 5,000, maybe he'd help me feed just one. I didn't raise a perfect son, but I raised one with my whole heart. I gave him everything that love knows how to give, everything that motherhood demands without asking for applause. And sitting there at that table, after he drained my savings and looked at me like a stranger, I realized something I never thought I'd have to say out loud. He was my retirement plan, and I still ended up overdrafted, not just in my bank, but in my spirit. And yet somehow I still loved him. Not because he deserved it in that moment, but because love this deep doesn't know how to unplant itself. It just aches quietly and hopes one day it blooms again in better soil. After all those memories flooded my chest like a dam breaking open, I needed air, not from outside but from inside the weight I'd been carrying. I left him sitting at that kitchen table and walked through my house slowly, like I was reintroducing myself to every wall. My feet moved from habit, but my heart moved from something deeper, something that was done waiting to be seen. I passed the hallway mirror and barely recognized the woman in the glass, not because she looked different, but because she'd finally stopped making herself small to protect the feelings of people who only remembered her when they needed something. I walked past the picture frames, the ones filled with moments where we all smiled like nothing would ever fall apart. I didn't touch them. Just let them remind me of who I used to be and how far I'd stretched to keep peace in a house that didn't always give it back. The doorbell rang just as I reached the living room. I didn't jump, just turned the knob and found Miss Geneva standing there with her head wrapped in a blue scarf, holding a brown bag that smelled like fresh banana bread. That woman always knew when something was off. She didn't say hello. Didn't need to. Just looked at me with those eyes that had seen too many storms to pretend she didn't recognize the clouds. "You home?" she asked. I nodded. She stepped in, handed me the bag, then followed me to the couch like we'd been doing it this way for years. And we had. Sometimes you don't need family to feel seen. You just need someone who knows how to sit in silence without asking for a story. But this time, I told her anyway. I told her everything. Not in anger, but in truth. I told her about the airport bench, the party, the money, the account, the betrayal, the silence. And she sat with that story like it was sacred, like it deserved a space on the shelf beside every other moment that made us women grow thicker skin over soft hearts. When I finished, she reached for my hand and said, "Well, I guess it's time to remind them who built this house." That sentence didn't come with advice. It came with clarity. We sat for another hour, nibbling the bread, sipping lukewarm tea, letting the quiet settle in the places where pain had lived too long. Before she left, she looked me square in the face and said, "You gave him more than he ever earned. Now it's your turn." After she walked out, I stood at the window and watched her disappear down the driveway, the same way I used to watch him leave for school, hoping each time he'd remember what home meant. I didn't cry. I'd already spent enough tears on lessons I didn't ask to learn. Instead, I walked to the filing cabinet in my bedroom closet, opened the third drawer, and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched since the mortgage was paid off. Inside was every paper that ever had my name on it. This house, that account, the insurance, the emergency plan, the will, the things people think they have time to figure out later. I sat at my desk, fingers gliding over signatures and stamps in legal language that once felt distant but now read like a shield. I made a list, a clean one. Steps I'd take, not tomorrow. Now. Because protecting your peace doesn't wait for permission. I called the bank again, this time to start the transfer of my accounts to a new number, a new card, one that no one but me would ever touch. Then I called the woman who helped me update my healthcare directive last year and asked her how quickly we could revise the names on file. She said she'd call me back by morning. I told her, "Take your time, but not too much." I walked back into the hallway and saw him still sitting at the kitchen table, holding the same cup, looking like a boy who realized the fire he started might just burn the only bridge he had left. I didn't speak, just looked at him the way I used to when he was little, and I had to take away something he wasn't ready to let go of. Not because I wanted to hurt him, but because I needed to save him from himself. Then I turned away. That was the moment I knew I wasn't waiting for him to understand anymore. I wasn't hoping for an apology. I wasn't holding the door open for someone who kept walking through it with muddy feet. This house had been mine long before he ever threw a party in it, and now every room was waking up with me. That night, after Geneva left and the house went still again, I sat at my dining table with every light on like I needed brightness to help me see the truth clearer. I pulled out every folder I had, every envelope marked important, every document I used to tuck away, thinking I'd never really need to hold them again. And there they were, my bank statements, lined with transaction after transaction that didn't have my fingerprints on them. My home deed, still in my name, untouched but quietly heavy, with the weight of years I spent making it a sanctuary. And the power of attorney form, with both our names sitting there in black ink like a promise I made without knowing it would be broken. I stared at that paper for a long time. I remembered the day I added his name to that account, remembered thinking I was doing the responsible thing, the loving thing. Just in case something ever happened to me, I wanted to make sure things would be simple. I thought I was protecting him from hardship. I didn't realize I was giving him the keys to destroy the very thing I built for peace. I'd walked into that bank wearing my Sunday coat, smiled at the clerk like I was proud. Told her, "He's a good boy, he'll do right." She nodded. I signed. And I left that day feeling like I was one of the lucky ones who didn't have to worry about their own. But trust is funny like that. It always feels solid until the floor gives out beneath it. And there I was, sitting at my own table, the same table we shared birthdays and puzzles and tears over spilled juice on, reading the evidence of what trust can cost when it's handed over too freely. I held that account paper in one hand, and in the other, I held a pen, and I didn't hesitate. I crossed out the line that linked us. Not because I didn't love him, but because love doesn't mean lifetime access. Not to your body, not to your time, and certainly not to your bank account. I called the bank again, spoke to a young woman who sounded nervous when she asked me if I was sure. I told her I was. I told her I'd never been more certain about anything in my life. She walked me through the steps, one by one, and I followed them with the same steady hands that once held his when he was too scared to cross the street. When it was done, I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, breathing slow like I'd just finished a job long overdue. Then I moved on to the house. I opened the deed file, double-checked the title. It was still mine. Sole ownership, no additions, no sneaky shifts. That gave me a calm I didn't expect to feel, like one part of me had stayed protected even while everything else was being drained. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote down every task I needed to complete the next morning. New account, new will, removal of old names, change of passwords, notification to the lawyer. It was a list not of vengeance, but of freedom, because sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do isn't fight, it's reorganize her peace. I looked around my home and realized how long I'd allowed love to look like sacrifice without boundaries. I let things slide. I let behavior go unchecked. I filled gaps with prayer and second chances. But clarity has a way of showing up when trust leaves the room. And when you lose trust, you gain clarity. You see who's been eating at your table with a fork in one hand and a shovel in the other, ready to bury you if you ever stopped giving. And I wasn't going to be buried. Not in this house, not in this lifetime. So I took back my name, my accounts, my control, and I did it the way I do most things. Quietly, thoroughly, and without a single soul needing to clap for me. Because dignity don't need applause. It just needs a final decision. It was barely past 7 when I heard the door creak open again. The same door he used to run through after school with dirt on his knees and stories tumbling out of his mouth. But this time he walked in different, with urgency in his footsteps and heat in his tone. Like the truth I'd finally acted on was the betrayal, not the silence he'd built his comfort in. He stood there by the counter, voice already raised, hands flailing in disbelief. And he said, "Why would you freeze the money, Ma? Why would you do that to me?" I didn't answer right away. I finished folding the last page of my documents, slid it neatly into the folder beside me, and took one final sip of my tea before looking up. I let the silence stretch just long enough for the weight of his question to catch up with the mirror he refused to look into. Then I said it plain. Not loud, not cold, just true. The better question is, how could you forget who built that money in the first place? His mouth parted, like he had something ready, something rehearsed, but all that came out was air. I stood up from the chair and faced him fully. "You think I froze that account out of spite? I did it because you spent my trust like it came with refills. I did it because I gave you my name, my labor, my savings, and you took it all and threw a party with people who wouldn't know my story if it hit them in the chest." He shook his head, frustrated, tried to speak, but I kept going. That money wasn't extra. That money wasn't just sitting there waiting to be wasted. That was every night I came home late with aching feet, every bill I juggled behind a smile, every dinner I skipped so you could have seconds. That was the ring I sold when we couldn't pay rent, the Christmas I made ornaments from scraps just so the house wouldn't feel empty. That was my sleep, my years, my second chances folded into one account so I wouldn't have to depend on anyone when my knees got tired. He stepped forward, eyes wide now, voice trembling. "Ma, I didn't mean it like that. I thought it would be okay. I thought I'd replace it before you noticed." I looked at him like a mother who has seen behind the curtain and can't unsee the shadows. "You thought I wouldn't notice when I was the one who built every brick of what you spent. That's the problem. You don't think I see. But I always see. I just finally chose to act on it." He ran a hand down his face, paced like he was trying to outrun the shame catching up to him. "Just give me access again, Ma. Just for a week. I can fix it, I swear. You know I will." I stood taller, not just in height but in truth, in strength, in decades of swallowed words finally rising. "No, not this time. You're not being punished. You're being removed." He stopped pacing. That one landed hard. He looked at me like the ground had shifted beneath him, like he'd just discovered the well had dried up and he didn't know how to dig for water on his own. I didn't blink. I didn't soften. I let the silence do the rest. He started to protest, reaching for explanations, stories, bargains built on guilt. But I'd heard enough. Too much. I raised him with love, not with contracts. But somewhere along the way, he mistook love for permission and kindness for obligation. That's on me. But this moment, this was mine. I walked past him slowly, each step firm like I was reclaiming the ground he thought he owned. He called my name, twice, like it would undo what had already been undone. I didn't turn around. I didn't offer comfort where correction belonged. I kept walking until I reached the hallway, turned the corner, and let the door close behind me with the weight of every time I kept it open too long. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the standard. And this time, I didn't explain it. I didn't ask him to understand, because a person who gambles with your peace will always act shocked when you cash out. But I wasn't gambling anymore. I was done hoping that loyalty would grow where accountability had never been planted. I wasn't here to rescue him from consequences or patch the holes he drilled through trust with his own hands. That door stayed closed, and for once, I didn't feel like I was shutting him out. I felt like I was letting myself in. The day after I closed that door behind me, something in the house shifted. Not with noise, not with drama, but with the kind of quiet that wraps around your spirit and says, "This time, it's your turn." I got up early, before the sun had even found the windows, and I tied a scarf around my head like I used to when I was ready to work through something heavy. The house was still thick, with the aftertaste of what had happened. Like the walls were holding their breath, waiting to see if I'd do what I always did. Clean the mess, but leave the damage. But not this time. This time, I wasn't just wiping counters. I was rewriting the rules of what I allow. I started in the kitchen, the heart of every home, and I opened the fridge with a steady hand, one by one pulling out every container left behind by people who didn't know what sacrifice smelled like. There were half-empty bottles of cheap mixers, trays of greasy food, spoiled salad I never bought, and cake with someone else's name written across it in icing. I didn't flinch. I dumped every last thing into a trash bag, tied it tight, and set it by the back door like I was taking out more than garbage. I was taking out a season that no longer belonged in my life. The sink was piled with dishes that didn't belong to my peace, glasses I didn't drink from, plates I didn't eat off, forks that scratched my porcelain without apology. I rolled up my sleeves and washed each one slowly, not because they needed to shine, but because I needed to see myself in something that hadn't been touched by disrespect. As the hot water ran over my hands, I thought about how long I had allowed this house to stretch around chaos just to avoid confrontation. But now the confrontation had come and gone, and what remained was mine to reclaim. After the dishes, I moved to the living room. The speakers were still plugged in, wires like veins running under my rug, carrying a beat that never belonged to my heartbeat. I unplugged them, folded the cords, put every last piece into a box marked donation. I swept the floors 3 times, not because the dirt wouldn't leave, but because every stroke of that broom felt like an apology I was finally giving to myself for letting things slide for so long. I opened the windows and let the morning in. Let the breeze touch the curtains that had been closed too long. Let the light fall across the photographs still hanging on the wall. Worn frames holding memories of better days. And then I went to the hardware store. Picked up a new set of locks, fresh keys, something solid in my hand that said, "No more entry without permission." I came home, laid out the tools, and changed every lock myself. It wasn't easy. My hands aren't as strong as they used to be, but they're steady, and steady gets the job done. I turned the screwdriver slow and sure, hearing the soft click of old patterns being undone with every twist. When the last lock turned into place, I held the new key in my palm and whispered thank you, not to anyone else, just to the woman I'd become, for finally choosing to protect herself like she'd protected everyone else. That evening, I lit a candle on the table and pulled out my old journal, the one I used to write in before things got too loud to hear my own thoughts. The pages were yellowed, but patient, waiting like old friends do. I wrote about the airport, about the party, about the look in his eyes when I said no, about the quiet victory of standing tall without needing an audience. I wrote until my hand cramped, and then I kept writing, because some stories don't need to be shared right away. They just need to be witnessed, even if only by the page. That night, I lay in bed with the windows cracked, the air soft and clean, the sheets tucked just the way I liked them. No footsteps in the hallway, no music rattling the walls, no fear of what I'd find in the morning. Just sleep. Deep, honest sleep that comes when you've finally cleared the space between what you allow and what you deserve. I closed my eyes and smiled to myself, not because everything was fixed, but because everything was finally in motion. The home feels like mine again, because I claimed it, not with force, not with bitterness, but with quiet courage and the belief that peace is not just something you pray for. It's something you protect. It was 3 days after I changed the locks when his message came in, simple and small, and sitting in the middle of my screen like it didn't carry the weight of all that had happened. It just said, "I'm sorry." No explanation, no long paragraph, no voice note filled with reasons or regret. Just 2 words. 2 words that could have meant anything. Could have been sent in a moment of clarity, or a moment of loneliness. Or maybe even just a moment where the money ran out and he finally had to sit with what he'd done. I stared at it for a long time, not because I didn't know how to answer, but because I knew exactly what to say. I typed it slow, 1 letter at a time, like I was pouring it straight from my spirit. I wrote, "I know, take care." Then I put the phone down and walked outside to water my roses, the ones blooming stronger this season, like they'd taken strength from the silence that now lived in my house. Some folks think forgiveness means returning to the same chair at the same table, with the same people who pulled the rug from under you. But I know better. Forgiveness don't mean fellowship, it means I'm free. Free from needing him to understand it all. Free from waiting on a full apology that might never come. Free from explaining my hurt, just to make him feel comfortable about what he did. I forgave him in the stillness of my room, in the quiet folding of clean laundry, in the warm hum of my kettle when I brewed tea for myself without needing to serve anyone else. I forgave him because I wanted to, not because he earned it. Because carrying that weight any longer would have been like dragging a sack of stones through a field I was trying to grow flowers in. And I don't plant things where resentment wants to root. I am his mother, yes, and I'll always wish him well, but that doesn't mean I'll open my door to pain dressed up in memory. There comes a point in a woman's life where she stops asking why they hurt her and starts asking why she stayed quiet so long. I'm not mad at him anymore. I'm not waiting for him to show up with flowers or promises or some grand gesture that makes it all make sense. I'm not watching the road hoping he pulls in with better judgment and older eyes. Because motherhood taught me something years ago that only aging could make clear. Just because you give life to someone doesn't mean you owe them yours. I gave him the best of me. I gave him my mornings, my nights, my food, my warmth, my prayers, my second chances. But I will not give him my boundaries. Not anymore. I will not shrink just to make room for his regret. I will not open my door just because he knocked with the right tone. I will not hand over access to a peace I bled to build. Loving someone doesn't mean ignoring the lessons they wrote in your scars. It means reading them out loud when the healing finally arrives. So no, I don't hate him. I just love myself more than the silence I used to sit in. I love my quiet mornings, my blooming plants, my clean kitchen, My untouched savings, my warm bed with no secrets sewn into the sheets. I love the version of me that says yes to peace and no to guilt. And if that makes me cold in someone else's story, so be it. I know the truth. And the truth is simple. If they see you as a doormat, dust yourself off and build a door they don't have the key to. The sun was low when I stepped onto the porch that evening, warm light spilling across the railings like it was reaching to hold me just one more time before the day let go. I brought out my chair, the old one with the cushion that dips just right in the middle, and my tea, not hot anymore but still comforting. The sky was a soft gold, stretched wide across the tops of the trees, and the wind had that quiet hum in it that only shows up after something hard has finally passed. I sat down slow, careful not because I was tired, but because peace asks to be entered gently like a room you finally earned the key to. The house behind me was still. No music, no footsteps, no heavy hearts tiptoeing around tension, just me. And I didn't feel alone. I felt claimed, like the space I fought for had finally wrapped its arms around me and said, "Welcome back." I looked out past the garden, past the fence, past the driveway, and my thoughts wandered, not with sorrow but with memory. I thought about how easy it is for people to call you strong while they pull from you without asking. I thought about how long I sat in silence, while someone I raised played DJ to my heartbreak, laughing over bass lines built on my labor, pouring drinks with the same hands I used to place bandages and prayers on. I thought about how many times I stood in the back of my own life just to give someone else center stage, how many nights I stayed up budgeting the impossible just to make sure he never knew what fear tasted like. And all it took was one party to show me the truth I'd been too kind to say out loud. Sometimes they don't change because you won't let them fall. Sometimes they dance while you cry. And sometimes you have to take your power back, not with shouting, not with fighting, but quietly, legally, fully. I didn't get revenge, I got clarity. I didn't throw him out. I removed myself from the cycle. I didn't stop loving him, I just stopped letting that love cost me my voice, my rest, my savings, my soul. And now I sit here, not broken, not bitter, but rebuilt, reclaimed, ready. This porch, this house, this woman, they all belong to me again. And I keep this light on, not for the ones who left, but for the ones like you, the ones who stayed too long in silence hoping someone would notice the ache. So let me ask you something now. Have you ever been the one left waiting while they dance through the life you built for them? Have you ever sat in silence while your own child celebrated with strangers, forgetting your name, your hands, your history? If you have, I want you to do something. Not for them, for you. Take your power back, quietly, legally, fully. Don't argue, don't beg. Don't repeat yourself to people who already made up their minds. Protect what's left of you like it's treasure, because it is. And if you've been there, if you felt even a piece of what I've spoken tonight, I want you to tell me your truth below. Don't hold it in. This porch don't judge, it listens. And before you go, do me this one favor, subscribe to Granny Stories. Because this porch light stays on for the ones who waited, gave, and got forgotten. But never stayed broken. Stay tuned for more, baby. I've got stories to tell, and I know you've got some too. See you next time.